Welcome back to the Worldliness Podcast, everyone. We're back with another book review. Today we're going to be reviewing Animal Farm by George Orwell. So let's hop right into it. We're going to start off with a summary first, what the book is actually about. So the story takes place on Manor Farm, which is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Jones. One night while Mr. and Mrs. Jones are asleep in the main house, an old boar or an old pig named Old Major gives a speech condemning the oppressive farming system set in place by humans. Old Major gives this speech in front of all the other farm animals so they could rally together in their concerted effort to overthrow the humans. Old Major mentions that, so this is a quote from Old Major. He's a critical character in the beginning of the book, but he dies really early on in the book. This is a quote from the speech that he gave on this first night of the book. So Old Major goes, "Man is the only creature that consumes without producing. He does not give milk. He does not lay eggs. He is too weak to pull the plow. He cannot run fast enough to catch the rabbits. Yet he is lord of all the animals. He sets them to work. He gives back to them the bare minimum that will prevent them from starving, and the rest he keeps for himself. Our labor tills the soil. Our dung fertilizes it. And yet there is not one of us that owns more than his bare skin. You cows that I see before me, how many thousands of gallons of milk have you given during this last year? And what has happened to that milk which should have been breeding up sturdy calves? Every drop of it has gone down the throats of our enemies. And you hens, how many eggs have you laid in the last year? And how many of those eggs ever hatched into chickens? The rest have all gone to market to bring in money for Jones and his men. And you, Clover, where are those four fowls you bore, who should have been the support and pleasure of your old age? Each was sold at a year old. You will never see one of them again. In return for your 4 confinements and all your labor in the fields, what have you ever had except for your bare rations and a stall?" Old Major died a few days after the night of his speech. However, Old Major's speech encourages the animals to revolt against the humans, led by Napoleon and Snowball. So these are 2 pigs of the farm, Napoleon and Snowball. The animals defeated Mr. Jones and his men and established the tenets of animalism. Animalism is meant to be the guiding philosophy of the new farm, which is named Animal Farm. So before it was Manor Farm, it is now Animal Farm after Snowball and Napoleon lead the rest of the farm animals to defeat the humans. So animalism has 7 principles. These 7 principles are: 1. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. 2. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. 3. No animal shall wear clothes. 4. No animal shall sleep in a bed. 5. No animal shall drink alcohol. 6. No animal shall kill any other animal. 7, which is really the most important principle of animalism. 7, all animals are equal. Snowball and Napoleon tried governing together, in that they schedule meetings with all the other animals on the farm and try to make fair and wise decisions on what is best for the advancement of Animal Farm. So Snowball is a well-spoken, organized, and inventive pig. He's a really great orator, and the animals sort of take to Snowball more than they do Napoleon. He believes in the essence of animalism and aspires to manifest what Old Major first introduced. Napoleon, however, is an aggressive pig who has a strong and intimidating character. He's more concerned with power than he is with making competent and wise decisions and fair decisions for fair decisions for the Animal Farm. Snowball and Napoleon are never able to reconcile their differences. So the point in describing their personalities is that early on, and really up until the middle of the book, Napoleon and Snowball's personalities clash so much, and they are never able to reconcile their differences because of their predispositions, their temperaments. They constantly clash with each other on almost every decision that needs to be made. Snowball comes to suggest that a windmill ought to be built so that the animals can work less in the future due to the energy that the windmill will harness. Napoleon feels this is a waste of time and generally a bad idea. When the animals start to side with Snowball on the topic of building the windmill, Napoleon recruits dogs to chase Snowball off of the farm. The dogs nearly kill Snowball, but he is able to squeeze through the fence and escape. And from that point forward, Napoleon dictated what work would happen on the animal farm. The dogs were always at his side in case any farm animal needed to be made an example of. Over time, the principles of animalism were changed to benefit the pigs, so no animals other than the pigs were sufficiently literate. The pigs were able to manipulate all animals that were unsure of the accuracy of animalism under Napoleon's rule. So, this is a really important point of the book. The only animals that were sufficiently literate or were able to learn to become literate were the pigs. All the other animals weren't literate. There were some animals that could read, maybe one that could read a few words or could manage to read a sentence or even construct a sentence, but none of them were actually literate. And so it was really easy under Napoleon's regime to manipulate the rest of the animals in order to get them to do what Napoleon saw best for the animal farm. Squealer is another pig, and he's sort of Napoleon's propaganda puppet. Squealer made sure that all animals never questioned Napoleon's decisions. He never failed to distribute falsehoods in order to keep the animals under Napoleon's dictates. And in the end, only one principle of animalism remained. The principle was all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So remember, the original philosophy of animalism had 7 principles, and the last principle, which was the most important principle, was that all animals are equal. Under Napoleon's rule, all the rules slowly start to change. For example, one of the original principles of animalism was no animal shall lay in a bed. Under Napoleon's rule, they changed it to no animal shall lay in a bed with sheets so that the pigs could lay in a bed without sheets. I think they even had comforters, but they just said these don't count as sheets in the book. But anyway, some of the animals were upset that they saw, that they heard about pigs sleeping in the beds, and they were like, well, wait, we can't read the actual tenets of animalism that are written down, but we are pretty sure that we remember that one of the main rules was that no animal shall lay in a bed. Squealer and sort of the rest of Napoleon's sphere of influence changed that to no animal shall lay in a bed with sheets. And so, in the end, only one rule remains, which is all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. The pigs started sleeping in the main house, which used to belong to Mr. Jones. They slept in beds, drank alcohol with humans, and came to oppress the rest of the farm animals in the same way that they were previously oppressed. Power and tyranny corrupted the entire system. Okay, so that's the summary of the book, and I thought I might mention how I found it. It's really not that exciting. There's not that much to it. I was just at Barnes & Noble, and I was looking in the classics section, and they had a couple of George Orwell books out on display, and I was deciding between 1984 and Animal Farm, and I went with Animal Farm, obviously. So, yeah, that's the main place I go to find books is Barnes & Noble. But there's also this other really cool bookstore in Detroit called John K. King's Books. It's a 4-story building, and each floor is just filled with all these cool, old, really unique books. So those are the 2 places that I go to, just in case anyone's interested. All right, and so what are my thoughts on the book? So, I really like Animal Farm, and it's because I'm sort of a Russian history nerd, and I don't mean that in the capacity that I know a lot about Russian history. I just have sort of a decent understanding of the Russian Revolution and a little bit about the Soviet Union, and just in general, I really like learning about Russia and Russian history. So Animal Farm is clearly a commentary on the rise and fall of the Soviet Union. The language of the book is so clear and simple, And I think the reason for this is that Orwell was undertaking a difficult task in attempting to represent the story of the USSR through fiction. Clearly, his main intention with writing this book was simply to get the point across to readers. And you would have to know really nothing about the Soviet Union to not see all of the allegorical references. Like, I think if you have some understanding of the Soviet Union, or maybe the Russian Revolution, that's what the book is about. So let's discuss the characters then, to sort of put all of this in context. Or let's discuss who the characters represent. Mr. Jones, who is the original farmer of Manor Farm. Mr. Jones and his wife and the humans that were in charge of Manor Farm originally, they represent the imperial czarist regime. And I'm going to break some of this stuff down more. So if you're not really familiar with Russian history, just stay with me, and I hope that I'll, explain it as we go along here. So yeah, Mr. Jones and the humans represent the imperial czarist regime. Old Major represents Vladimir Lenin and Karl Marx. He represents more than just Lenin. Maybe you could read this book and take it as like, yeah, primarily Old Major represents Lenin, but he also represents the philosophy of communism, especially his speech. That original speech that he gave on that first night, that really represents the Communist Manifesto and the philosophy of communism, that philosophy that guided Lenin and the Bolsheviks through the Russian Revolution into the Russian Civil War. Okay, Snowball. Who does Snowball represent? Snowball represents Lev Trotsky, who was the general of the Red Army during the Russian Revolution, really Lenin's right-hand man. Napoleon. This one was the easiest reference to get. Napoleon, remember, is this like aggressive, intimidating, really like big, strong personality. That's the pig that is Napoleon. Napoleon represents Stalin. Squealer, who is the pig that was sort of, I think I described him as Napoleon's propaganda puppet. Squealer is, my interpretation was the propaganda of Stalinist Russia. So I think Squealer, yeah, he doesn't maybe he represents one primary source of propaganda that came to fruition during Stalinist Russia, but I think primarily Squealer just represents propaganda altogether during Stalin's reign. The book is so fascinating if you're interested in Russian history. I already had a decent understanding of the Russian Revolution again, but reading Animal Farm helped me understand the history from an alternative perspective. Animal Farm really effectively displays the extent to which propaganda and deception became a part of Stalinist Russia. Power corrupted the hierarchy that was being established post Mr. Jones, or post Tsarist Russia. The imperial Tsarist regime. It goes to show that perhaps the biggest threat to the sustainability of any government is the proclivity of power and sheer dominance corrupting the entire system. So it's not that let me continue. So who knows how successful Snowball's regime would have been? I don't think it's a bold claim to think, that it wouldn't have degenerated in the same way that Napoleon's regime degenerated. And at least Snowball was calculated and relied on competence instead of force. So it's not the fact that the animals post Manor Farm were trying to establish their own successful farm, Animal Farm. They were trying to build a new system, put a new system into place that would really bring prosperity for the animals, and that would be much more fair than things were before when Mr. Jones was, when Mr. Jones and the humans were in charge. So, however, what we can extract from this as it relates to Russia, what emerges is the traps along the path of man's pursuit of utopia. So let me try to break this down a little bit. This was the dream that Lenin sold during the beginning of the revolution. And so in Animal Farm, this is the dream that Old Major sold in chapter 1 when he gave that speech where he was talking about how man works the least. They produce nothing, but they consume all. And this was the dream that Lenin sold during the Russian Revolution. Peace, land, and bread for all. If you're unfamiliar with that quote, that is a quote of Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, who really fostered and led the Russian Revolution before he passed away in the 1920s. And that's when Stalin took over. But anyways, peace, land, and bread for all. Peace referred to the end of Russia's involvement in World War I. Land referred to the abolition of private property, which is inherent to capitalist systems. Not the abolition of private property. Private property is a part of capitalist systems. The abolition of private property, in general, the abolition of private property is a part of communism, communist philosophy. It's literally, I have the Communist Manifesto here, and really, if you take the time to read the Communist Manifesto, the main thing that you'll get from it is Karl Marx wants the abolition of private property. Obviously, I'm reducing it, and I'm sort of being not flippant, but I'm joking. But that is certainly one of the main principles of the Communist Manifesto, the abolition of private property. Yeah, and bread is referring to the end of widespread food shortage that resulted from Nicholas II's incompetence during the final days of the Tsarist rule. So just real briefly, you have the imperial Tsarist regime that the last leader was Nicholas II. He was a rather incompetent leader. There was, poverty was pervasive under his final days. That's when Lenin comes in, and the rest is history. Of course, Lenin's message of peace, land, and bread was well received by the impoverished people of the time. So how this relates to Animal Farm? Of course, Old Major's message was well received by the rest of the animals. The rest of the animals have nothing. They're doing all of this work, and they see that the humans do no work in comparison to the work that they are doing, but they consume all. They sell some of what the animals produce to gain capital. And this is just really a classic commentary on I'm going to butcher this, but the bourgeoisie and the proletariats. So the pursuit of a communist utopia quickly became a murderous campaign to enforce communist ideology around the world. This happened at the hands of men who were in over their heads, to say the least. And again, to bring this back to Animal Farm, Stalin, who is Napoleon in Animal Farm, Napoleon, who in Russian history is Stalin. Napoleon takes over after Old Major dies, but there's this period of limbo where, again, Snowball and Napoleon are going at it, and they're not able to disagree, or they're not able to agree on anything. They're definitely able to disagree, and things just degenerate under Napoleon because he slowly became more concerned with power than he was with setting in place an effective system. And I just want to say, if you're interested in Russian history like I am, there's so much to this, so I'm sure that you can understand, there's so much to wrap your head around here to really understand everything that Orwell was getting at, from the imperial Tsarist regime, from Vladimir Lenin, from Trotsky and Stalin. So I didn't even speak about that. We'll cover that briefly. So Napoleon and Snowball, right? They disagree on everything. Napoleon tries to kill Snowball, and this, if you are unfamiliar, this happened between Stalin and Trotsky. Remember, Snowball represents Trotsky. Stalin after Lenin died was trying to garner support from the rest of, what would you call it? From the rest of the people who were establishing power post Russia, post Lenin's death. Trotsky and Stalin were the relationship between Napoleon and Snowball is accurate in its characterization of the relationship between Stalin and Trotsky. Stalin was this really strong, brute character. Trotsky was a great orator, a great organizer, led the Red Army. Slowly, Stalin is able to manipulate the rest of the people in power. He's already general secretary at this point, so he does have some power, but really that position of general secretary was not meant to have the amount of influence that Stalin gave it. Stalin really forced his hand and just forced his leadership throughout the 20s, and obviously into the 30s and into World War II. Trotsky eventually is forced to leave Russia, and he actually ends up in Mexico years later, where he is murdered. And I think it's safe to assume that Stalin had a hand in the assassination of Lev Trotsky. So there's so much to this. I hope I did a good job. If like I said, that's why I wanted to preface this podcast with, I am super interested in Russian history. Like, there's no other history that interests me more. There's no other country who has a history that interests me more than Russia. So if you also know, a little bit about Russian history, and you have your own interpretation of Animal Farm and how it relates to the Russian Revolution, please leave a comment. I would love to continue this discussion and maybe even come back with a part 2. And actually, I think look, these ideas are extremely hard, and for the sake of my listeners, I want you to know that I did my due diligence. When I do these book reviews, like, I read the entire book. I read Animal Farm. I've read the Communist Manifesto, and I fact check myself. Now, I might make a mistake here or there, and I don't think I did with this episode, but this all goes to say that I'm doing my due diligence with these episodes because I want to provide useful and informative content. So, yeah, you can don't lose sleep overnight thinking that I'm not over here grinding on this podcast, because I am. Matter of fact, it's 12:36 a.m. I just got out the shower and I did this podcast. I'm a beast. All right, last segment. Who would like it? Who's gonna like this? Who's gonna like Animal Farm? I think those, obviously, who enjoy Russian history, like, that's an easy one, and also those who enjoy George Orwell, like, that goes without saying. Obviously, this is one of his most popular books. Maybe the only book that trumps it is 1984. So if you like Russian history, if you like George Orwell, you're gonna like this book. Also, those who are interested in how ideologies can corrupt governments, or how governments can degenerate due to ideologues and things of that nature. Also, if you're just interested in communism, socialism, or governmental systems in general, you're going to like this book. And lastly, if you enjoy fiction, this, just, I guess, in conclusion, Animal Farm is just a good fiction book. It was a really good book. I really enjoyed it. Not as much as The Old Man and the Farm. The Old Man and the Farm. The Old Man and the Sea. That's my favorite book ever. I really love The Old Man and the Sea. And if you haven't seen the book review that I did on The Old Man and the Sea, please go listen to it. That is episode 8, I think. Yeah, episode 8. So, I think the next podcast will be maybe an interview, maybe not. But we have a couple of interviews coming up. So I'm really excited to drop those for you guys. We have 3 interviews for sure that I know of right now that will be released towards the end of May and into June. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, if you know about Russian history, if I made a mistake, or if you just want to, give your thoughts, your perspective on Animal Farm and the Russian Revolution and sort of the history and the allegory of all this, then please do so. I would love to continue this discussion, and again, maybe do a part 2 or something. So yeah, thanks for listening.